Hi, friends, and welcome to an episode of Bite Size Bish. Today, I am going to be talking about a little bit of everything. I initially had hoped to talk about Potomac and I forget what else, but then Jax came out and admitted to being an addict. Brittany came out the same day and basically had a lot of her own thoughts. Kyle Cook and Hannah from Summer House are having beef, and Hannah just really made a huge gaffe at the Oscars. And, so my point is today we're going to have a little bit of everything. I am going to talk a little bit about Real Housewives of Potomac. I mean, at this point, to be honest, it's at the bottom of my list because I'm tired of talking about Karen. I think she got the, consequences that she needed and deserved. And, I'm kind of sick of talking about her delusion, but there will be a couple things that I'll point out here. So let me start at the top with Jax's recent announcement. And I have a article from People magazine. Brittany Cartwright reacts to ex Jax Taylor revealing his cocaine addiction and quote substance issues, end quote. This was published on March 4th, which was just very recently. Brittany Cartwright is sharing her reaction to ex Jax Taylor revealing his addiction struggles on the March 4th episode of Bravo's Hot Mic podcast. So, which is, by the way, Alex Baskin's podcast. Jax, who, by the way, is 45, they put his age, and I was like, damn, man, Jax is straight up middle aged. And, they say that men take more time to mature. And I just, here's the thing, when you're using a substance, you do not you are going to be immature because you're not focused on, the things that adults are focused on, growing, evolving, all these other things. When you're using a substance, that is your one main focus. And so Jax told Alex Baskin that he's been dealing with quote substance issues, primarily cocaine, for the past 20 years. It's a long time to be using substances. And it also does explain why Jax is stunted, like emotionally stunted, because he doesn't even know how to be an adult without a substance. I mean, that really is significant. He also said he's proud to share how he's now 83 days sober. He was asked, "Do you have an alcohol problem too?" And he said, "I don't necessarily think I have an alcohol problem, but the two can go hand in hand. I can't do cocaine without drinking, so I just gave up both." This is one of the first pieces where, I always want to root for someone who is able to say, okay, I have this issue. Because first of all, acknowledging it truly is the first step to say, hi, I'm Jax. I'm an addict, cocaine addict, alcoholic, whatever. The thing that people get confused about with substances, I will say this, is that a substance is a substance is a substance. So depending on how you get sober, if you're participating in the programs of AA, true recovery teaches that a substance is a substance, and so they all should be put down. But there are people who say, well, no, I just had a problem with this, so I don't have a problem with this. And so here's the thing. We could all really get stuck in the weeds of the semantics with all of this, but the fact of the matter is that what's going to work for Jax, only he and his provider know. But also, Brittany is the only person who really knows Jax, like really, really knows him. And so I think that it's important to follow her lead with things, because I'll just remind us all right now that, like, yes, I'm a therapist. I'm not his therapist. I don't know Jax. None of us know Jax. So we can't begin to say, well, he's this or he's that. We can't do that. But what we can look at is his words and say, this is really interesting. So, his wording here kind of tells me that, there's still denial and minimization, because he's saying, I don't think I have an alcohol problem, but every time I do cocaine, I also drink a lot. And well, then that is a problem, right? So here his words again just give me a little cause for concern. But then in an exclusive statement to People, Cartwright, who, by the way, Brittany's 36, she says, I'm glad that he finally admitted to what was really going on. For the first time, I can speak openly about the extent of trauma he's instilled on our family over the years. I've tried desperately to get him help without success. I pray that one day he completely knocks this addiction, but I'm skeptical. His behaviors are still alarming, and his treatment plan seems to be the bare minimum. Boy. She adds, I'm trying to navigate this as best I can for my son, but every day is still a challenge and very difficult. Jax has caused an enormous amount of damage, and I have very little trust in him at this point. My only hope is that one day he will be a better person for his son. She plans to shed more light on this on her podcast, which airs tomorrow on March 7th. So I'm going to be listening to that for sure. You know, listening to what she has to say, because from what I listened to on the podcast, which it wasn't much, as someone who's worked in the field of recovery, I can kind of spot things when, people say they want to get sober, but they're not quite ready. Or, like just as a clinician, you're kind of able to see some of those issues. And so when Jax was talking to Alex Baskin about, the whole thing, it just seemed very, again, identifying it is the first huge step, but I just feel that Jax, there was still a lot of denial, a lot of minimization, a lot of, like Brittany said, the treatment plan seems to be the bare minimum. And so what my honest opinion from what I'm seeing is that I think that Jax is hanging his hat on, oh, well, I figured it out. I figured this out. This is what the problem is. And it's like, but Jax, you have to figure out why you were using and so for so long and so many different substances. It's not about the substance, it's about what is that about for you? What's the mechanism under using? Is it, because let's face it, sometimes people get sober and it turns out they're not good people. I mean, humans are all terrible in many ways. That's the one thing we all have in common. And no, I mean, I'm teasing, of course, but for real, some people, they get sober and, they're like, oh my gosh, wow, this person was under here this whole time. And then some people get sober and they turn out to have kind of like criminality and antisocial, kind of personality traits that, when there's a pattern of criminality, there also substance use can go hand in hand with that. And so sometimes people get sober and then they realize that there are some really major personality issues to work on. And I'm not saying that that's the point with Jax. I'm just trying to help everybody understand that Brittany should be skeptical, because the one thing I've learned is nobody uses substances for 20 years and then just like admits like, yes, this is a problem, and then just gets better with doing minimum work. Jax has a behavioral pattern of doing the bare minimum, right? To say, well, I'm going to be a great husband and father, but forget the fact that I'm an active addiction, or I'm going to be, I'm the best guy in this group, and then not doing any of the work to actually get there. And also, here's the thing, his drug of choice, it makes a lot of sense considering who he is, because sometimes cocaine can create this sense of like grandiosity and, I'm amazing and I can rule the world. And so, if I'm being honest, just understanding what substances can create in people long term, I definitely think that, Jax has this very self-important, narcissistic piece to him. And I wonder how much of it is the substance that created probably a lot of like delusion and grandiose behavior, and what is just his natural personality. And the fact of the matter is that Jack's been using for the better part of his life, and he's got to get to know Jack. From what I'm hearing, it does not seem like he's ready or interested to do that. But as I said, this is just step one in the process. I will always support someone in their recovery, whether it's from mental health or drug and alcohol issues, if they're trying to do better for themselves, if they're trying to do better for his son. Because at this point, the thing is with Brittany, people will say, well, she knew that he was an addict. And, yes, she did. And she saw his behaviors over and over. And yes, she did. But all of us have been in relationships that don't serve us and stayed too long, if I'm being honest. I don't know anyone that hasn't done that. And so, yes, Brittany needs to look at her role. What led her to feel I can fix this person, I can change this person? Because she said I tried to get him help, but you know why that never happened? Because Jax didn't want the help. You can't, the old saying, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, that's with when it comes to change, the only thing that is absolutely required is in some sort of motivation, and it has to come from you. Sometimes it can start by motivation from the courts, right? So, for example, Karen Huger. Sometimes the courts will say, well, you're mandated to do this, and then people will go to treatment and they'll get the help that they need and it'll click. But until the person is ready, and I've seen people who have come to rehab 20, 30 times, not ready. And then the 31st time, they're like, you know what? I'm done here. It's the wildest experience to see. And the reason why I talk about it all the time is because even as a therapist, if I had never worked in these environments, I would have thought that I had an understanding of drug and alcohol that I didn't have. And, it's one thing to understand the dynamics. It's another thing to understand how inpatient treatment works. It's another thing to see people. It was kind of like, for me, a real sociological experiment. I mean, while I was working and helping people, of course, but it really did teach me a lot. And so I agree that I think Jax has a long way to go. And here's one thing I know for sure. I will always support someone trying to get well, but I'm also going to call people out on their bullshit. And so, how we'll know if Jax is changing, his behaviors will tell us. I am frothing at the mouth to watch The Valley. This is really where your Bish is going to shine. Like, I'm going to just look through The Valley with a fine tooth comb, just looking for things. And it's really what I'm best at. And I truly just cannot wait. So I wish nothing but the best for them, especially for their son. I think that the other major component here, I think that no one is talking about, is that, there is a genetic component to addiction. And so Jax's son, it also now makes sense to me why Brittany really felt like she needed to remove him from the situation, because, you can just imagine what that household might have looked like. And I talked before about sometimes children who develop speech issues, part of it is a psychological kind of phenomenon called selective mutism, which is if kids are feeling, and this is just one component of it because it's a very complex issue, but if children are feeling anxious or judged in an environment, it's not that they can't speak, it's that they are anxious and choose not to. And so a lot of children who grow up in homes where there's active addiction or a lot of fighting, that is something that does happen. Now, I have no idea about Cruz. That's none of my business. And that's between, Brittany and, Jax is still his father. But I'm just saying that it is painting a picture for me of, how bad these issues were and how they've impacted the entire family system. Because the last thing I'll tell you before I move on is that addiction is a family disease, which means that everybody in the dynamic, whether they like it or not, they play a role. And I think Brittany, for a long time, she just thought she could change him. And she thought that love was enough. And then she thought, well, maybe if we have a son, that'll be enough. And unfortunately, people in active addiction, that's their first love. That's their family. That's their first priority. If people are in active addiction, they're not going to be a great spouse, partner, employer, parent, friend, nothing, citizen, because, that's your priority. And that's kind of just how it is. So I just wish them all the best, and stay tuned because I cannot wait to cover The Valley. So going back to substance use, since we're on this topic, I'll talk a little bit about Karen and all of that. But first, I do have to talk about how the Stacy and the TJ of it all, that was so wild that Eddie, the whistleblower, Sefo, came out and basically had to testify that the rumor was true of what everyone said. And it was so odd to me that Stacy shut it down in part two, which I did find odd. It's so you're shutting something down before he even had a chance to bring it up. Is that suspicious? Is that not suspicious? I don't know. But so, I think that the one thing I really want to say here is that I hope to never see TJ on my screen again. I think TJ is an unreliable narrator. And I think that he is trying to blame Bravo for a flamboyant edit, which is the word that Eddie used, by the way. So TJ is mad that Bravo gave him a quote unquote flamboyant edit, but the only person who's responsible for his edit is him. And they can't edit what you don't do or say or express or behave. So I think that what happened at this reunion, in my opinion, was he was angry about this flamboyant narrative. So the natural solution was to cosplay toxic masculinity to prove his manhood. Men and their toxic masculinity. I just can't. So here's the thing. Potomac has been plagued by terrible men, really pretty much aside from Eddie, Gordon, and Uncle Lump. Like all these men have just been the worst. These women are gorgeous, amazing, talented, wonderful. Why are the men so terrible? Justice for these Potomac women. Are there no better men in Potomac? I mean, I live in Pennsylvania and I've been to Maryland and I've been to the Potomac area. I went to a wedding there a couple months ago. There are men around. No, I don't know what their quality are, but I just feel like, where are the good men? And so what was wild is like Stacy saw the footage. They're like, roll the footage. And she saw it and she's like, I don't believe it. And it's like, what do you mean you don't believe it? Like, you just saw it. And so then what I appreciated is that Wendy and the group questioned her character due to like her refusal to confront TJ. And Wendy, to me, this was Wendy and Giselle's best reunion. And it made me so excited to see them be able to have a friendship without Karen. Because here's the thing, Karen's absence in prison is going to impact this group's dynamic significantly. There's never been an ability for Giselle or anyone to have friendships without Karen. And I'm really interested to see how this is going to happen. But Wendy said to Stacy, if you come back to this show, or if you come back to the group, aka the show, no one will believe you. Your character will always be in question because you had the opportunity to clear it up and you didn't. And that came back to bite Stacy literally 15 minutes later when she sees the video, she denies it, and then all of a sudden she says hurt people hurt people. And it's like, I feel that's how Stacy's an interesting character, and I do want her to come back because I feel like there's some cracks in this like newscaster facade. I think she has an issue with telling half truths and not being fully honest about things. I think that she kind of lives in her own denial bubble. And when you live in your own denial bubble, you can't also have 2 feet firmly planted in the here and now, right? And so there's something, my clinical brain says there's something behind Stacy I need to see more of. I need to understand this issue. And so the one thing I wanted to raise is the idea of cognitive dissonance, which is the discomfort that happens when we hold 2 contradictory beliefs. So Stacy maintains her beliefs despite the contradictory evidence because avoidance can temporarily be less painful, but eventually it just ruins your life. Like if people put their head in the sand or compartmentalize and put their stuff in a box and put the box on the shelf, but then just never come back to it. Well, that's how Karen Hugers happen. Seriously. You can put something on a box, you can take a beat, you can take a minute, but if you don't ever go back to that stuff, it's going to become like an anchor on your leg. And so Wendy said, we did try to help you and now you look crazy. And then Stacey followed that up by saying, that's my best friend tonight, but still I rise. And then the women all, they were like, not, and still I rise. One thing I love about Potomac women is they'll just like laugh at each other and call it out. And I just really, really loved that. It was such a dumb moment. And it's like, girl, rise yourself above this denial that you're in. And between your ex-husband and TJ, your picker is off. So figure that out. Figure out why your picker is off. And so the video, the one thing before I move on to some Summer House stuff is that Karen thought she could escape accountability by skipping the reunion, but I'm super happy to see that the package included receipts, timeline, fan criticisms, and real talk. And after watching a flashback of Karen, he asked the group, what do you think? And Ashley replied, she uses alcohol to cope. And then Giselle said, it's big delusion. And I was like, everyone get yourself a friend like Giselle, because a real friend needs to tell you when you're screwing up, when you're like in denial, when you're having serious delusion. That is what a friend is. A friend is not an echo chamber of bullshit. And, I just feel that, I don't know, but I just feel that Giselle, I appreciate her realness a lot of times. And also, so finding out that Karen was offered a plea of house arrest for 6 months and she declined it to go to a jury trial. Come on. So here's the thing. Wendy pointed out that legal counsel had to be aware of this police body cam footage because they requested to suppress the evidence. So everyone just pointed out the absurdity of how Karen had so many opportunities to avoid this, and her denial sunk her. Her denial literally sunk her. And so the one thing I really want to point out is that, as I mentioned, you need to have someone, like, if you're sinking in denial, you need to have someone that's pulling you out and saying, like, you're drowning, and not like, yeah, you got this. Ray, in my opinion, is as great of a part of the problem with Karen as anybody. And I'm going to go back to addiction is a family disease. So if we do not understand the disease of addiction, we will co-sign our loved ones' behaviors until death. I mean, that's how people die from the disease, is they have too many echo chambers sometimes. I mean, in addition to a million other reasons. That's not the only reason, but in this field, denial can be deadly and real talk can save someone's life. So I think that Karen and Ray, there is a super interesting psychological concept. It's called folie à deux. It is a French saying for shared delusion. And here is something funny about folie à deux and your Bish therapist, is that when I was in college, literally Penn State, so this was in 2002 or 2003. Okay, this was a long time ago. I remember learning about not paranormal psychology, although I do like paranormal psychology. I find that interesting. And I did have a professor, by the way, who was on a paranormal psychology show. Interestingly enough, he was kind of a big guy in that area, and he taught at Penn State. But anyway, in terms of like pathology, and there's like a part of psychology that kind of determines that sort of stuff, or talks about that sort of stuff. And I remember learning about this concept of folie à deux, and it fascinated me because I'm like, wow. So it's when two people share a delusion, but like literally they share the same delusion. And I was always so fascinated by it because I'm like, for one person to hold on to a delusion takes a lot of like processes to happen, but for two, that is fascinating. And it is always a concept I've been weirdly obsessed with. And recently Joker came out, and it with the Lady Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix Joker, called folie à deux, which means shared delusion. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the time for this weird uh, disorder that I've been obsessed with my whole life. And I really, in all seriousness, I kind of see this with Karen and Ray. This video to me, I was like, okay, so if Karen is sick, that explains that. But what explains Ray? This woman is sprawled out on a bed in a cream sweater, full glam, and it's just like Karen continued to make all these excuses about antidepressants and blah, blah, blah. And so one thing that I'm going to say is you cannot abuse antidepressants in the way that Karen talked about. Also, the one thing that she talked about is not following medical advice by secretly increasing the dose. Okay, so for those, I'm on a litany of medications, psychotropic and otherwise. Okay, I have many diseases. I have PTSD, I have depression, I have cancer, I have dystonia, I have a million things. Okay. And so I feel that, like, the point is, again, it's not necessarily the substance, it's the behavior behind the substance. So Karen is telling me, and by the way, only I can recognize that she's telling on herself, okay? Because she's saying that, well, I don't have a problem, but then you're taking a prescribed medication and you're exhibiting behavioral characteristics that accompany addiction, which is, I know better than the doctor. I'm going to take more than prescribed. I'm going to take it on my own schedule, which is not how it works. I get medication sent from my pharmacy, and they will not give you more than one extra pill, not even a half, just in case you drop one. They don't care. You aren't able to get any additional medications. So obviously, she was taking medications at her own pace and not as prescribed. My point is that the behavior underneath that, it's not about the antidepressant that's the trouble, or the benzo, or whatever it is she's on, because I think she's using the term antidepressant to make something she's taking seem more legit, if I'm being honest. So I think she's just weaponizing mental health all over the place. Because here's the thing, I have a deadly disease, cancer, and my mental health issues and the medication that I take for that are as important as my cancer treatment. Okay. So I'm not going to stand here and continually have antidepressants be weaponized. They are life saving and I just won't stand for it. And I've already said this, but I just can't. I just can't with this. So I think that truly her behaviors are telling me that she's not well. Ray's not well. He's part of the problem. And if I'm being honest, Ray desperately needs to get educated about the disease of addiction. And he needs to get educated about how he may co-sign or enable. This scene with Karen was full blown enabling. A loved one with a full understanding of what's going on would say, I am not doing this with you. If you want to do it with yourself, that's fine. But I'm not going to co-sign this behavior because at the end of the day, again, let's remember Karen's denial is deadly. And the fact that she or others haven't been hurt yet is a miracle. And her turning down, please, also tells me that this is very, very serious. And so here's to Karen serving time currently in jail. Hope she's learning something. Hope she's learning something in there. All right. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is Kyle Cook and Hannah Berner. So I just watched Summer House last night. And, Kyle Cook is just such a king baby. I have no time for him. I just do not understand. Amanda is such a wonderful person. I don't understand what it is about Kyle that is interesting to her or anybody else. He is just like a child incapable of managing his emotions. And so he just lashes out. He cries. He sits in his car. He feels bad for himself. And the call's coming from inside the house, Kyle. Like, you're the problem. The problem is you. It's you. Now, so for those of you who don't know who Hannah Berner is, so Hannah was on Summer House seasons ago and she was fired because fans didn't like her. There are a lot of fans that do not like Hannah. Hannah and Paige hosted the Oscars and recently went viral for some microaggressions against Megan the Stallion, I should say. And so I'm going to explain this a little bit. I think that Kyle spent this whole time rage texting Paige about Craig and Hannah, who Paige is not their representative. And so Kyle spends time just like justifying his shitty behaviors. Kyle will just treat women like shit and then be like, well, you hurt my feelings. And it's like, hi, grow up. You emotional infant, you king baby, grow up. Having your feelings hurt isn't a reason to rage at a woman, to, be aggressive and like get please. And again, it's like, what's so crazy to me is that Kyle Cook and Hannah, they have all these issues. And my take is because they're very similar. Kyle and Hannah both struggle to take accountability for the stuff for their role in things. So Hannah basically blames Kyle for getting fired. There was like issues with Loverboy, but I think the real reason Hannah got fired is because people didn't like her. The fans didn't like her. A lot of people don't like her. And the reason is, going back to this Megan Thee Stallion interview, Hannah was like, "OM squee, Megan, your songs make me want to fight." And so that's a clear microaggression. And for people rolling their eyes, well, I don't know what to tell you. Microaggressions are real. And that's a very good example of one. Megan Thee Stallion is a goddess, a queen, and her songs are all about self-empowerment and being a baddie, badass bitch, and they're great. Her music is great. She's not a gangster rapper. She's not talking about fighting. It's not Tupac and Biggie and all that stuff. And so it's a clear microaggression. And I think that the real reason Kyle and Hannah have issues is because they're very similar. They're both people who will say, I've done something, but I'm not going to totally take accountability for it. And as evidenced by today, posted in her stories, by the way. So when someone posts an apology in their stories, I feel that it's like, you got to put this on the grid. If you're really sorry, you got to put this on the grid, but she didn't. So this is what she said, and this is breaking news because I just saw this and then decided to podcast. Interviewing Megan Thee Stallion was a dream of mine. I love her music and it's my go-to whenever I need to boost my confidence before a show. Looking back at the interview, I wish I used any other word except fight to describe how her songs impact me. It was a careless choice of words, and though there was no ill intent, I recognize and acknowledge that what I said has deeper meaning, and I'm so sorry to Megan. I appreciate everyone who brought this to my attention. Okay, this is why this is a BS apology. Hannah is doing what Kyle does, which is using the semantics game. It wasn't just that she said that piece about fighting. It was how she behaved on the red carpet, how she behaved. There was like this montage of things that Hannah did that a lot of people felt frustrated by. This Megan Thee Stallion thing wasn't the only thing, but it was the biggest thing. And I think that her choice to apologize in a story and to talk about the word that she used, that is inherently problematic. When it comes to microaggressions and maybe some cultural biases, we have to be willing to say it wasn't just this word, it was this, my behavior was the issue. And so, because it's not just about a word. And so with Hannah, I think it's also, she lacks that impact versus intent thing, right? So like her intent wasn't bad, but the impact, people are saying this was not okay. All people are saying it from all different communities, all different cultures. I, myself included, I thought it was wild. As someone who was a fan of Megan Thee Stallion, her music has nothing to do with fighting. And so my final take on this all is that Kyle and Hannah have very similar issues. I understand that Paige really loves Hannah, but I really kind of think that Hannah's going to continue to get Paige in trouble, my personal opinion. I hope she learned something from this, and I hope she learned something from, like, again, if she's not learning from the fact that, oh, I was fired from Summer House, and it really has nothing to do with Kyle. Kyle doesn't have that much power. It's because people didn't like me. And if you refuse to acknowledge that, and then you continue to blame Kyle in all these podcasts, and then you're doing this thing with Megan Thee Stallion, my point is there has to be some learning that happens here. There has to be some, okay, I messed up here and I really have to look at this, which I know is really not a popular stance right now, but I will continue to preach it from the mountaintops. Woohoo! So anyway, longer episode than usual today, but I had a lot to talk about. I will be covering Brittany's podcast about what she has to say about Jax, and I'm very excited to cover the Valley. I don't know that I've ever been more excited for a show to come back in my life. So for today, that's going to be it. Please do me a favor, everyone. I just want to encourage you to go over to my Patreon. It is free to join. There are levels that you can join as well to get certain, for example, this episode that I am recording right now, I am recording video that I release to my Patreon, and I also do ad-free and early releases. So if you like YBT and you don't want ads, you want early drops, you want video of me with crazy hair in like a ratty sweatshirt, well then come on over to Patreon and look at my face. Thank you so much for all of you who continue to support and give good reviews. Please continue to do that. I just appreciate you all so much, and I am loving it over on Patreon. And so selfishly, I just want people to join because we're really having a kiki over there. So lots of group chats, DMs, things like that. So please come on over, see what it's all about. Thank you all for your support. Sending love to you and yours, and ta-ta for now. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Great Heart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.